Welcome guys to the second video of this tutorial series, and in this video we are going to see how to create our empty data table and make it to display some custom data. Then in the subsequent videos we are going to see how to implement some of the functionalities mentioned in our introductory video. So what we are going to do is we are going to head over to this GitHub repository and we are going to clone the first branch, that's the setup branch, which is just the empty project with all the needed dependencies. So we're going to go ahead and copy the link, then head back to this folder that I just created called my custom React data table. So you can call the folder what you want, and we're going to open a command prompt terminal in this folder. So I'm going to type the command git clone with this URL. Alright, so we can go ahead and close this terminal and open up this cloned folder in VS Code. Alright guys, so this is our empty skeleton project. So we're going to go ahead and explore some of the files, some of the most important files of this project, starting with the app.jsx file. So we can see in the app.jsx file, which is our main file that is rendered, we just have this data table component being rendered. So if I head over to this data table component, for now we just have this h1 being rendered called my custom React data table, meaning that if I run the project presently, it's just this h1 which is going to be rendered. So I'm going to head over to our package.json to see the dependencies used. So just have a couple of material UI dependencies, because that's the styling library that we're using in this project, and the normal React dependencies. So I'm going to open a new terminal. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and type the command npm install, and this is going to install all our needed dependencies for our project. Alright guys, so with our dependencies installed, we can go ahead and run the dev command, that's npm run dev, to speed up a local development server for our project. Control click on the link, and there we go guys, just my custom React data table being rendered. So we're going to head back to our project into our data table.jsx folder, and we're going to begin the creation of our actual data table. Alright, so here in the data table component, the only thing I want to render is our table, that's our data table. So I'm going to displace this h1 and send it to the app.jsx component. We can also get rid of this state over here, has no use for the meantime. So I'm going to return back to our data table component, and I'm going to create a table element. That's our normal table element, and give it a table head as well as a table body. Alright, so I'm just going to arrange this a little because I have some elements that are going to enter inside the head and the body. Alright, so what I want to do now is I'm going to paste some data in the table body and the table head just to see what it looks like in our browser. So I'm going to get this. Now in the table head, I've got a table row element with two table data elements, one for the name and one for the age. While in the table body, I've got a table row element with two data elements, one containing a name and another one containing and age. Alright, so if we save this and take a look at our browser, we just have this name, age, Rayman, and 19, and this is our table head. That's the row found in our table head, while this is the row found in our table body. So literally, when you are working with the data table, what we want is we want to collect data from somewhere, that's some kind of endpoint or backend, and display it in our data table, because the data that we want to be dealing with is it's actually interactive data. That's data that can be changed, and it's true that we can use maybe static data like kind of an array here, but well, for practical cases, you are going to be dealing with some form of backend or API. So in this tutorial, we use JSON server to simulate a kind of local backend, which is going to be giving us some data that we're to display on the table. So we're going to go ahead and install JSON server and feed it some data which we are going to fetch and use for our data table. Alright, so we'll just open a new terminal, then type the command that's npm install-g JSON server, which is going to install JSON server globally in your machine. Well, in my case, I've already done this, so I'm not going to run the command, but if you don't have JSON server installed in your machine, you can run the command. Now that JSON server is installed, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder, or call it data, and this new folder, I'm going to create a JSON file, students.json. So in this project, we're going to be working with students data. So I'm just going to paste this data which I got from my GitHub repository. So this actually just a JSON file with student records. So each record here represents a student with an ID, a name, a matricle, an age, and a level. If you want to get this data, you can head over to the GitHub repository on the second branch, that's for the branch for this video, into the data folder, then the students.json file, and yeah, you have that JSON data, so you can use it and follow along with the tutorial. So I'm just going to head over back to GitHub to VS Code, sorry. What is going to happen is we're going to run JSON server, and it's going to serve us the data in this file, which we're going to fetch in our data table component and display on our table. With all that done, we'll go ahead and save this file, then open a new terminal and run the following command. So JSON server with the watch flag, and we're going to enter into the data folder, then watch the students.json file, then save the data on port 8000. So we'll run the command, we get JSON server serving us that data on this resource. So control click on the link, and yeah, we get the students data on this resource. So back to VS Code, and what we're going to do is we're going to fetch for that data in this our data table component, then render that data on our data table. And to do that, guys, I'm just going to come above this return statement and paste a few lines of code. Alright guys, so this is practically just a state called students. So we initialize students to an empty array, but this student state is actually going to store all our students data with a use effect that fetches for the students and sets the student state to the JSON which is going to be received. So here we just console log this JSON to actually confirm that we received that data. So before going ahead and running this code, we just have to make sure that we import all our functions used here. That's the use state and I think use effect. Those are the only two that we used. So we're just going to import use state and use effect from React. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and save this and check in our browser to confirm. Alright, here in our browser, we're just going to check in our console. And there guys, we have the student array of I think 39 records. Yeah, so our students data is actually being received now. So we're fetch for the students data now, and we're ready to use the data to do something here in our table component. But first, we notice that each record has an ID, name, matricle, age, and level. So what we want to do is we want to modify our table head row such that it displays the name, age, well, such that it displays all the fields that we have above for each student. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an array called columns, as you can see. So this column array is just an array of objects, and each object has a key and a component. What we want to do is for each element in this array, we want to cycle through the array and create a row element which is going to display this component, because the fields we want to have on our table, we want to have an ID field, a name field, a magical field, age, gender, and level. For each element in this array, we want to cycle using these keys as the key elements, that's the key props, and render these components as our field components. So I'm going to go ahead again and paste some line of code in here so you don't see me doing a lot of typing. Alright, so practically as we said above, we take the columns array and we map throughout the array. So for each column, that's each element in that array to be precise, we're creating a table data element, and that table data element, we use the element's key as the key prop and the component, that's what we want to be rendered as the data in that table data element. Alright, now for our table body, we want to do something similar like what we did for our table head, where we cycle through the columns, and for each column we create a table data element. Except for our table body, what we want to do is for each student record, we want to display a new row. So instead of table data elements, we are going to be creating table row elements for each record, that's for each student record obtained from this fetch. So to do that, I'm going to paste the following lines of code. I'm going to reduce this terminal a little bit. Alright, so there we go guys. So what we're doing is the data obtained from this fetch, which we stored in the student state over here, while cycling through the data, that's once we get the data, we use the AND operator to actually make sure that we cycle through the data only once the data is received. So cycling through this data, we are calling this function for each record, that's for each object we get in the student's data received. So we call this function on that object, and what this function does is it simply returns us a table row element, passing the ID of that student as the key prop and setting the student ID as the data ID prop. So what we're going to do later in the future is we're going to use this data ID prop to do stuff such as editing the student, deleting a particular student, and so on. So for each row element created, we have the following data elements in the row element, displaying the student's ID, the student's name, matricle, age, gender, level as expected. And also a precaution that should be taken is that the number of data elements we get here should match the number of rows that That's the number of objects that were set as our columns above, else we'll have an irregular table. Alright, so I think in the code I've pasted, there have been no new inclusion or no new function needed to be imported. So we're just going to go ahead and save this and check our browser to see what we've got. Alright guys, so when we come ahead and check in our browser, you can see we have all this data displayed. So we've got the IDs, the name, the matricle, the age, the gender. Well, and now you see we've got nothing on the gender. So let's inspect in our console and see what's wrong. So when we inspect our that's our student objects, we'll see that we've got no gender property. So we've got no gender property, and actually this is my mistake because this is not actually the right student data. This is not what I got from the GitHub repository. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all this data from the GitHub repository, which is the correct data, and I'm going to replace that in our students.json file. So this is the correct data that we've got from the GitHub repository. So the data on the GitHub repository is correct. I don't know where I actually got the wrong data from. That's my bad, but yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and save this, and JSON server is going to re-render that data for us. So we'll head over to the browser once more and refresh. Alright guys, so we've got the table now. Everything is complete, just 10 records, and everything is in order. The IDs, the names, the matricles, ages, genders, and levels. So the data is displaying the way it has to, but you can see that the table lacks some styles. So what I'm going to do is still head over to the GitHub repository, and I'm going to enter this table.css file and copy all the styles we've got. Then come back to our VS Code project and create this table.css file. Then paste the code we got from our GitHub repository into it. So next, we're going to import that CSS. So save all the files. The table is displaying a lot better. So we're going to come back to this table.css and explain some of the styles gotten from the GitHub repo. So here we just have the styles for the table, making the layout to be fixed, meaning we want the size of the table to be constant. That's the width of the table should be constant, careless of the data found in the table. Here we're collapsing all the borders, font size, family, and giving the table some shadow, width of 100% to fill all the body, and yeah, some margin top. Then for the table head, we want the table head to have a blue background actually. Well, when we see here the table head, the background is not actually blue, and that's actually because we didn't put here. It precises that the table head and that's the table row found in the table head, but here in our data table component there's no table row in our table head, so we are going to adjust that. Yeah, and now we've got that blue background on our table head. So for the table head, that's the table row in the table head, we just give that background color, give it the color of white, text align of left. So for the table, that's for the TH and the TDs, We actually have no th in our code for now, but for the tds, we give them some padding and align the text. And then for the last row, that's for the last row in our code, give it a green border bottom. So we can see that little green border bottom there. So guys, reviewing our code one last time to actually put together all that we have done. From the top, we've got a student state, and this state is responsible for storing the data we get when we do a fetch to this resource. So once that fetch is done and we have the data in the student state, once the data is obtained, we map through the data, and we know that data is simply an array of students. So we call the map function. We want to collect each student object and call the create body tr function on that student. So when we call that function, it simply returns us a new row in our table. So it adds that new row to our table, and that row displays the student's ID, the student's name, matricle, age, gender, and level. And also guys, to make sure that our columns and our rows are in order, that's to make sure that each data type falls under its respective field as the way we can see on the table. We have to ensure that our columns, that's our columns data, is ordered same way that our data in our T array is ordered. We've got ID, name, matricle. So this is actually what permits us this ordering of data. And also we have to make sure that the number of fields here is the same as the number of fields here, or else we are going to have that's a strangely ordered table. So it's actually the ordering and the numbering that permits us to have the well-structured table. Alright, so guys, that's it for this tutorial, and see you guys in the next tutorial where we're going to be talking about customizing our data table. And by customizing, we simply mean rendering some custom components such as an input field as well as some icons. And in the subsequent tutorials, we are going to see how to set up these components such that they can actually perform some functionalities such as searching for the input fields and editing or deleting for the icons. So thank you guys, and see you guys in the next tutorial.